Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Think Small podcast. I'm your host, Denise Steinbring, and I want to start today with a number that should stop you cold. 65,766. That's the number of qualified nursing school applicants who were turned away in 2023, not because they weren't good enough, but because of faculty shortages, budget constraints, and a bottleneck that most people in healthcare have never thought about. There weren't enough clinical training sites to place them. There is a healthcare workforce crisis in America, and much of the conversation is about salaries, burnout, and visa policy. My guest today makes the case that a significant part of the problem is administrative, and he built the company that's fixing it. Kunal Vaishnav is the co-founder and COO of Exet, a vertical SaaS platform that manages clinical placement, curriculum, compliance, and training coordination for more than 1,600 academic programs, 10,000 clinical affiliates, and 400,000 healthcare students across the country. He came to this from a senior consulting role at Deloitte's healthcare practice. He bootstrapped Exet for 14 years alongside his co-founder and CEO, Arti Vaishnav. And in January 2026, the company received a minority growth investment from Excel KKR. Kunal, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the Think Small podcast.
Thank you, Denise, for having me.
Yeah. So maybe take a moment to explain for people who aren't in the healthcare industry, what exactly is the problem that you're solving and how did you identify this gap?
Yeah, thank you, Denise. I appreciate that. Healthcare education is a very complex ecosystem. When you think about what it takes to educate the next generation of a clinician, and when I say a clinician, it could be from any of the health profession field. You could be studying for a physical therapy degree, an occupational therapy degree, a nursing degree, a social worker. You actually have to go through a rigorous curriculum in this country. And as part of this curriculum itself, you have to complete what is called a clinical experience, meaning you have to complete a rotation at a clinical site itself. Usually, it's a very involved process where schools typically build relationship with those field sites in order to find rotations. I have heard and seen students who have not been able to complete the graduation requirements, because they have not been able to complete all of their clinical placement / rotation requirements. And secondly, as you said, there is definitely a paucity of clinical sites across the country. So Exact fits the solution right in the center of where the problem sets lie. I'll give you a little bit of a backstory of Exact, Denise, in terms of the solution we have created and the problem that we are trying to solve.
Yeah, that would be great.
So about 15 years ago, the story starts with actually my daughter, Anushka, and Arti and I were living in Los Angeles at that point in time. And Arti was working at University of Southern California, Keck School of Medicine in the USC Norris Comprehensive Cancer Center. And she used to manage the informatics core. At that point of time, she was working on creating a lot of databases, working with doctors and physicians at USC Cancer Center. And we had our daughter who was also going to USC's daycare at that point in time. And during one of those pickups, one of the administrative staff at the Department of Physical Therapy approached her and said, hey, I hear you guys make databases working with doctors and physicians. We have this problem for clinical placements where we have about a growing need of trying to figure out how to match 80 to 100 students to different clinical sites for their rotations. Can you help us create a database? And so the germination of Exact really came across at that point in time. And while Arti did make a custom database for USC at that point in time, a few years down the line, both Arti and I were studying at the Marshall MBA program at USC. And one of the courses Arti had taken was in marketing, where she had to do a market study. And at that point of time, we studied this market a bit more, and we realized, hey, there is a need outside just USC for a clinical placement database to really help solve the clinical placement challenges that both schools and sites were facing. So we created this company called Exact, and our first go-to-market product and customers were in 2014. It was very interesting that our first two launch customers were also in Southern California at that point of time. They were the ones who believed in our vision and really invested their dollars before even we had a full completed working product at that point of time. Since then, we started to expand, and I would say we started to build a momentum, especially in healthcare education and academia space. It follows a network model, right, where a couple of schools sign up and the ball just starts rolling. And that's what happened with Exact too. We signed up for first two schools. They talked about it with their friends and colleagues in the space, and more programs started to look into Exact. And it became a rolling machine, to the point that now we work with around 1,600 different programs in the country, Denise, across 65 different disciplines. So Exact has not only just stuck to physical therapy, but now we have branched out to many disciplines, because at the end of the day, from a education perspective, if you have a student and they need to go out to a field to complete a clinical rotation, and what does a clinical rotation mean? You don't want to actually have a student who's training to become a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a nurse, a medical student, without actually having to go to the hospital, talking to a patient, being able to diagnose the problem, so on and so forth. And so clinical rotation becomes a mandatory requirement. And so you need an administrative software to coordinate all of that. And that's where Exact fits in into this space, Denise.
And this, everybody, is what comes out of advanced learning. I just love the story that her market research kind of led her to some of this. and people asking questions in the hallway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there are 78,000 empty full-time nursing positions in America right now, with projections of 500,000 unfilled healthcare jobs within the next decade. I think probably most of us think it's about salaries or burnout or immigration policies, but you're sitting on data from 400,000 healthcare students and 10,000 clinical affiliates that tells a different story. So make the case for us that a significant part of this healthcare workforce crisis is actually an administrative problem, and what that bottleneck looks like from where you sit.
Yeah, great question. A few years ago, when we were looking at healthcare education, for the first 5 years of the Exact story, we only focused on the school side and creating administrative solutions. But over multiple years, Exact has been approached by a lot of the clinical sites and said, hey guys, we have the same problem that the school have. We also need to understand what is the capacity that we can offer to our school partners in order to take those students. A lot of the times, health systems, clinical site affiliates don't even have systems for them to accurately predict how many students can they take in. So this is where a software like Exact comes in. They also need to understand what students are at their hospitals at a given point in time. In the event that, especially in nursing and health systems out there, if the Joint Commission walks in to their door, they need to be able to understand and say, hey, this student is working at the site, and do I have the appropriate onboarding requirements for them already captured, so that I don't have a student who is sitting in my hospital system without the appropriate credential and all of the documentation. What we have seen out in the field is, without a lack of a proper coordinated system, it is quite a time that, because of the health systems do not know how many students can they train at those facilities, they sometimes are conservative in terms of how many students can they take in. So from a healthcare workforce perspective, a lot of the times the systems are also creating agreements with school partners, which limits other school partners from actually also sending students over to these health systems. And one of the reason is, the health systems themselves need to first of all understand from their from a preceptor population perspective, how many students can they actually work with from a day in, day out perspective. So a lack of a system really compounds the problem. There are two things that actually we see in the market right now. One is nurses are right now quitting en masse the clinical sites because of burnouts. If you compound that with not having enough visibility, because at the end of the day, the students become the talent of the future. Right? You need the systems to essentially hire the students. And who is your next best hire? The next best hire is the person who is already in your hospital system, rotating at your site. If you don't have mechanisms to essentially track that student when they're at the site and essentially follow them through the journey, you're not able to convert that student into a future talent. And that's where all of this compounds by itself. The healthcare workforce shortage is essentially compounded by nurses retiring, not having visibility into student placements, and obviously ensuring that from a school perspective, there are enough students being enrolled at the schools also, as you correctly alluded to at the beginning of your discussion. A lot of the nursing schools today have to turn out many qualified applicants because they don't have enough capacity at the schools also to accept all those applicants too, because of faculty shortages too. So you have shortages on the school side from a faculty perspective. You have shortage of the clinical sites also that can accept in students. And at the site who can accept students, they don't have visibility in terms of what is their actual capacity.
Wow, it's so counterintuitive, right? You've got all these open positions, and yet 65,000 students are being turned away. How close are we to solving this gap? And what has been the hardest part of building this company from your perspective?
I think both the schools and the systems realize that they have a problem on their hands. And we have seen a lot of positive steps taken in that direction. For one, every state now has a nursing workforce center. The nursing workforce center actually starts to create collaborative relationships. In fact, I will tell you a success story, which was something that we discovered and we were able to put them on exact, is Maryland DC Collaborative. Maryland DC Collaborative is a collaborative made up about 40 nursing schools and about 20-30 hospitals in that region, who all decided saying, we want to operate better between both the schools and hospitals, and we want to create a consortium so that we are able to better not only to predict capacity, but we are able to better track which hospital is able to take what students, and are we meeting all of our workforce requirements. So the collaborative last year decided to adopt exact one, which is our hospital module, as a platform from both a school and a hospital perspective. And just this year, they are now seeing immense success. About 25,000 plus placements have been coordinated in that state, Maryland and DC state, through the exact platform itself. So I think as more and more schools and more sites, first of all, create a consortium. Secondly, they start looking at systems not as siloed, but as one single solution that both of them have to participate. The nursing workforce challenges, the healthcare workforce challenges should start to alleviate a little bit. At the end of the day, it takes two to form a relationship. And this is where the partnership really comes into effect. Denise.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, good for Maryland. It sounds like you're on the right track. So I'm curious about this. You're building what is essentially a two-sided marketplace, right? You've got academic programs on one side and clinical sites on the other. And so the network effects have got to be powerful here. The more programs you have on the platform, the more valuable it is for hospitals and vice versa. But getting those flywheels started is one of the hardest problems in business because you're selling to two completely different buyers with different budgets, different decision makers, and different timelines. How have you actually cracked that problem in a vertical as conservative as healthcare education?
Well, I think on the school side, first of all, Exact took the approach of approaching this network from a school side first, Denise. We know the schools are the one who essentially admit the students and have an administrative problem of trying to have a software to manage all of the clinical placements. When we started Exact, we used to go and pitch our products to each and every department. Over the last, I would say, 5 to 8 years, we have also taken the enterprise approach, where a lot of the universities, similar to their implementations they do with their learning management systems and student information systems, they also install Exact enterprise-wide. We have noticed, especially after COVID, that a lot of the CIOs, CTOs, provosts, deans are more conscious in terms of the number of systems that teams and faculty have to use. So with rationalizations and system consolidation, a need for a system like Exact, which can not only help with the breadth, but also the depth of each of the programs becomes very critical. So we took the approach saying, why don't we approach one side of the network? And then once we have enough scale on one side of the network, so we think of this as the Uber model, right? Where you have the drivers and the riders. If you don't have enough riders, even if you have hundreds of drivers, you won't be able to match all of the drivers to the riders. Same thing from a other side of the network perspective. So we were a one-sided platform, I would say, from a school perspective. Over the last few years, Exact has truly become a two-sided network with the introduction of hospital systems in this ecosystem, with the introduction of Exact One. I would say for companies who are looking to go into the network model, my thought process is you have to study what makes the network stick. For us, the people that we started with were the school side of the network. And once we have enough capacity, or I would say once we had enough people who were needing to look into the slots or clinical placement capacity, then we brought on the hospital systems onto the network. As you also suggested, the buying process is also very different between both the schools and hospitals. On the school side, our buyers typically could be program directors, or it could be directors of clinical education. It could be the deans of health sciences, deans of nursing, or it could be the provost or the technology teams, the CIOs, right? Whereas on the hospital side, the buyers can range from anywhere from talent acquisition teams to student placement teams to chief nursing officers to the different executives at those health systems out there. So we just had to create different stories and different hooks in terms of how to ensure that they are able to understand the value proposition. Sometimes we had to even tell them, hey, there is a problem that exists in your ecosystem, right? We would go in and ask some of the hospital system executives, tell us, how are you predicting capacity? Is this a strategic imperative, a strategic priority? And through those discovery questions, we sometimes had to make them understand, hey, there's a problem sitting in your ecosystem out there, and then there is a solution that fits that need.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And maybe that dean or provost was a new buyer type, right? That alerted you to, hey, we got to take more of an enterprise approach to this. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Especially after COVID, as I was mentioning, before COVID, a lot of the programs were used to making their own individual buy decisions. After COVID, we have noticed that a lot of the university administration, especially on the school side, are taking a more proactive approach in terms of system rationalization and system consolidation, not only from a budgetary perspective, but also from a data side of things. If they have one system of record, then even for them to make decisions at an enterprise level becomes that much easier.
Yeah, fascinating. So the network's effects on the academic side play in
Mm-hmm.
your favor, right? Because it's all word of mouth. USC tells Chapman, Chapman tells
Mm-hmm.
Arizona, and so on. How do you deliberately engineer that word of mouth rather than just hoping that it happens?
So I think we have to, every single client initially when we work with them, we had to essentially create champions out of every one of them, Denise, right? A lot of these clients need people who listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big things that we have focused on is customer service within the organization. In fact, Exact is known for its high touch customer service, high touch onboarding process. A lot of these times, the schools essentially need someone to come in, understand their process, share best practices, and just listen to them and deliver a system that meets all of their needs. Anytime we have entered a new space or a discipline, the first 5 to 10 clients, we have always been in that listening capacity so we can understand specifically what are their requirements that they would want from a system like Exact. We also use the traditional channels like going to conferences, doing webinars, hosting essentially open office hours, so on and so forth, in order to start engaging them. A lot of these times, the schools in a singular profession might also have essentially a consortium, whether within a state or at the national level, where we would do lunch and learn sessions, as well as do other mechanisms in order to spread the awareness. But then at the end of the day, your customers become your best, I would say, person who is going to refer the next friend.
Sure.
You would be more willing to buy from a person who gets referred to you,
Yeah.
right? And this is very true in an academic setting, Denise. There, if I just approach the next school and they have not heard of Exact,
Right.
it would be a much longer convincing process in
Mm-hmm.
terms of why they should invest in a system like Exact.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I get a warm introduction from a colleague of theirs, if I get a warm introduction from another colleague at another university, then I'm much more likely to get their first foot in the door.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's pivot to, how you've built this business. So you've
Mhm.
bootstrapped it for 14 years, friends and family money at the start, no outside capital for over a decade. And then this year you had an investment by Excel KKR. That's a
Mhm.
firm that has backed companies and expects significant returns on a defined timeline, right? They move at a much faster pace than a founder-led company. So you've been building that deliberately and with precision, but now someone with very different time horizons has a stake in your future. So what actually changes, and what are you going to protect at all costs?
Great question. So first of all, we are very excited about the investment from Acel KKR. We, as you said, we have always been bootstrapped. However, we have always had the backing of our friends and family. They are the ones who have invested in their company. Whenever Aarti said we want to design a new product or we had to change platforms, our friends and family always stood up for us, and they invested in our vision, our thought process, and in us as people. Having said that, when we started to think about the next investment, we wanted to partner with a company who not only understands SaaS, but also understands essentially what it takes to scale in a SaaS model there. And a Cell KKR fit the bill quite there. They are a minority investment within Exact, Denise. So from that perspective, what they are bringing to the table is how are other companies in their portfolio looking at SaaS, and especially with the introduction of AI, how are other companies looking at introducing AI within their portfolio also. So there's a lot to learn for us as a company and mature. They're also bringing to us some operational best practices across all the strata of the organization, whether it be finance, whether it be accounting, whether it be sales and marketing, and all of the different aspects of the running the business. So we are pretty excited. What doesn't change is the culture of the company. One of the very big things that Aarti has focused on is building a culture where people feel empowered and people genuinely love working with each other there. So what doesn't change is the culture. We have our culture at the company is focused on our core themes, which are called ROAR there. And so those are the four pillars of the organization itself, and that doesn't change. What also doesn't change is our investment in people and getting them to the next level in their career, in whatever they aspire to become next. What doesn't change is our focus on customers and making sure that they always feel heard, that they have a seat and a voice at the table, and ensuring that whatever decisions we make as a company is keeping our employees and our customers in mind.
Yeah. One thing that you shared with me previously that I stuck with me was you said, and I think this is a great nugget for our listening audience, is always keep your relationships warm with VCs and PEs because you never know when you might decide to raise a round. How did you become familiar with PE companies and VCs in your normal, day-to-day work for people that may not have those folks in their network?
Yes. Over the years, Exact has been approached by a multitude of PEs and VCs through the cold emails. Sometimes we have been introduced. We have been blessed with an incredible experienced board of advisors, Denise, there. And so the board also helped us through this transaction itself. But over the years, we have been approached by many different kinds of VCs and PEs. And so Aarti and I had always taken the approach is let's ensure that we keep the relationships warm, because at the end of the day, you get to learn from a lot of them because they are also talking to hundreds of companies and they are trying to say which company they should invest in next. So it was important for us to learn what are the KPIs that each of those VCs and PEs are looking for in high growth companies. Secondly, when they make their investment decisions outside the KPIs, what are some of the other intangibles they would be interested in? And thirdly, I think if you guys are considering, if your listeners are considering raising a round, I think you should always be thinking about, is this a person that I can share a meal with, a drink with? And is this a person that I will be able to discuss my strategy of the company's growth freely? And will they be a contributing partner and just not be looking at financial metrics at the end of the day? Are they a person truly invested in your success? And I think there's a difference between a company who does a minority investment and does a controlling acquisition. With a controlling acquisition, obviously the things changes. But in our case, because it's a minority investment, AKKR is at the table for us, actively working on the business and advising us through their meetings, through all of their summits, through the day-to-day interactions with us. Whenever we ask them for a particular question, an introduction, they always get back to us.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you ran this PE process yourself without an investment banker, right? Some people might say that's leaving money on the table, or at least leaving expertise on the table. So why did you decide to do it that way? And would you do it again?
One of the reasons is because we had an incredibly experienced board of advisors, Denise. Our board of advisors consisted of people who have gone through the process multiple times before. So they were with us every step of the way. So if you have a very strong board of advisors like we had who have gone through this process, I would be willing to say, go alone and be able to run this process yourself. If you don't have an experienced board or an experienced group of people who have gone through this, I would recommend, yes, investment banking is a good, hiring an IB, hiring a firm would be a good approach. For us, we were just in a different circumstance. Because we had kept the relationships warm with VCs and PEs. So internally, we had created essentially a short list of 5 to 10 VCs and PEs that we would want to work with. When we started the process. So we already had a shortlist created over the last 5 to 6 years through all the different outreaches. We talked to them, they interviewed us, we interviewed them, and then the board really helped us think through who are the top 3 Ps that we should consider in the final round. And we just then went through a process with each of them.
I see. That is gold information right there, everybody. So, Kunal, last question for you. You've built this company for 14 years in a market most people had never heard of, scaled it to
Mm-hmm.
400,000 users, navigated a pandemic, and now you're entering a PE-backed acceleration phase. For a founder or an operator who is building something right now, maybe in a niche market that nobody is paying attention to yet, or maybe wondering whether it's the right time to take outside capital, what's the one thing you know now that you wish somebody had told you when you started?
Yeah, I would say, um, irrespective of whether you're trying to raise right now, especially with AI right now, some of the multiples are down in the SaaS space. There, I would say, raise when you are trying to raise, think about three things. What will you do with the capital that you raise? Do you have a good deployment strategy? You don't want to be in a situation where you raise a round and then you have to then go back and say, well, how do I deploy this capital? You should, as a founder, as a person who's invested in the business, as a person who owns a company, you should always know the answer of how will you deploy the capital, whether it be new products, whether it be go-to-market strategy, expanding geographies, whatever your priorities are as an organization. So always understand your capital deployment strategy. The second thing is, I would say, choose the right partner. And it's a very hard thing to decipher as an owner, founder, to say who are the people that you should be working with. I would say go through a rigorous vetting and discussion process. Don't make a decision just by talking to a person over the Zoom. Have a meal with them, right? Have a couple of discussions in person with them. You will notice how much people will open up to you over a shared meal. And are you on the same wavelength from a culture perspective? And do you see this person really helping you incrementally grow the business there? And third thing, always keep in the back of the mind why you started the company in the first place, right? You should always be thinking about, hey, am I raising for the right reasons, right? You might want to raise, you might be asked to raise because, hey, you probably need to double your growth. But should you be doubling the growth, right? Can you take 5 years? Can you take 10 years to double your growth, triple your growth, right? You should always be asking the question. Once you get a PE, as you said, they will have a timeline, right? And are you ready for that?
Yes.
Essentially. So when you ask me, what are some of the things I wished I knew? I would say talk to a person who has gone through a process before. Make sure you fully understand what you're signing up. And are you ready for the next 5 to 6 years with that PE, right? And if you are, and if you truly have internalized that, then I think you should go ahead and raise irrespective of the environmental or market conditions.
Yeah. And back to your point on culture, you had also shared two other questions that you've asked yourself. Are we doing right by our customers and are we doing right by our employees, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
I think that's critical. Well, Kunal, this has been a genuinely substantive conversation. For our listeners who want to learn more about Exact or connect with you, where should they go?
Yeah, they can to our website, www.exact.com. And if they want to connect with me, they can just email me directly at Kunal, Kunal, at exxat.com.
Lovely. Thank you for that. And to our Think Small listeners, if today's conversation changed how you think about the healthcare workforce crisis or gave you one concrete principle for building a two-sided marketplace or navigating a PE investment for the first time, please share this with somebody who needs to hear it. We'll see you all next time, and thank you so much, Kunal, for your wisdom. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me on, Denise. Appreciate it.
Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?